archaeologist, philosopher, bonsai aficionado, author, black belt, and squanderer of over 50,000 hours watching B-movies. Using archaeology to dig deep and connect clues, he uses this wealth of useless knowledge to bring you classic snarky movie reviews and world-famous short summaries. Now broadcasting from beautiful downtown Tallahassee, it's Nantan Lupan at the Drive-In.
Hello, thank you for listening today. If you'd like to help this podcast keep going, please drop by iTunes and give me a review. It'll help a lot. I want to thank listeners Mark, Thaddeus, and Sammy. Well, this is a manly movie with lots of horses and good old-fashioned American justice. Following the original Bruce Cabot line from King Kong 1933, we now arrive at the Undefeated 1969. This movie was originally billed as having the most horses ever used in a movie with 2,500. According to thehorse.com, this movie was filmed in Durango, Mexico, and the horses were rented from local villagers, so an accurate count is not possible. The hooves were branded to identify ownership. This movie has a lot of star power, including most of the traditional John Wayne posse. Of course, the biggest star in this movie was John Wayne. Wayne, who never served in the military, was cast in the role of Union cavalry officer Colonel John Henry Thomas. Like the other 1969 movie, Wayne was a little old and a lot heavy for this part. The name John Henry Thomas seems to be based on George Henry Thomas, who was known as the Rock of Chickamauga, where he saved the routed Union Army by making a determined stand while the rest of the army retreated towards Chattanooga. Of course, the Civil War Thomas was a general, as opposed to this character, who was a colonel and hailed from the Oklahoma Territory. Oklahoma was an Indian territory until 1889, so if he hailed from there, he would have been some type of illegal land squatter. But I'm sure they made him from Oklahoma so he could have an adopted Cherokee son named Blue Boy, and we would all know how fair and liberal the character was. Rock Hudson was cast as Confederate Colonel James Langdon. This character seems to be largely based on Confederate General Joseph O. Shelby. Shelby was active mostly in the Trans-Mississippi West during the war. Following the surrender, Shelby and about 1,000 of his troops headed south to Mexico. They became known as the Undefeated in popular lore. They hoped to fight as a foreign legion for Maximilian I of Mexico, the leader of the French invaders. Maximilian granted Shelby and company land to settle, but would not accept them as fighters. This ended 2 years later when the rightful government of Mexico returned to power. One of our favorite drinking holidays comes from this war. On May 5, 1862, the Mexican Republican forces under General Juarez won an unlikely victory over French forces at the Battle of Puebla. So we drink. Nobody likes the French. Hudson served during World War II as a Navy airplane mechanic. He worked hard to get into acting, and his big break came in 1956 with Giant, which also starred James Dean and Elizabeth Taylor. Hudson was cast in this movie because he was tall like John Wayne, and Wayne wanted to be cast with tall actors. Also, he was a good bridge player, so he and Wayne had that in common. Apparently, they had a great time and were friends by the end of the shooting. Later, Hudson said of Wayne, "I did a movie with Duke Wayne, and I was very surprised to find out he had small feet, wore lifts, and a corset. Hollywood is never what it seems." Unquote. Following a very successful career in movies, including many with Doris Day and television shows such as McMillan and Wife, Hudson died of AIDS in 1985 and was one of the first major stars to announce that he was afflicted with this disease. The adopted Cherokee son of Colonel John Henry Thomas, Blue Boy, was played by Roman Gabriel. Gabriel was a Filipino-American and was the first Asian American to quarterback an NFL team. He was a quarterback for the Los Angeles Rams from 1962 to 72. That's right, the Rams were in L.A. After a decade with that team, he ended his career with the Eagles, who were and still are in Philadelphia. Gabriel was a long-haired quarterback back then, and by that I mean his hair touched his ears and his bangs had to be pushed out of his eyes. They gave him a long wig for this part and made him speak in standard broken English Native American. He was only in one other film and had a few television appearances. Another football player turned actor was Merlin Olsen in his first role as Little George, a giant razorback that didn't like to fight. Olsen also played for the Los Angeles Rams from 1962 to 76. His career was mostly in television, and he had a recurring role on Little House on the Prairie. Jan Michael Vincent played the young Confederate Lieutenant Bubba Wilkes, just like one of them old redneck boys. Vincent was a handsome young actor that was a force to be reckoned with from the 1970s through the 1980s. He was often cast as a lone force bucking the system. He was cast with major stars of the era such as Charles Bronson in The Mechanic, 1972, and with Robert Mitchum, 1971, in Going Home. In 1984, he was cast in the TV show Airwolf. After 3 years starring on the show with Ernest Borgnine, Vincent's star power was gone. Mostly the blame was his addiction to alcohol and drugs. He had several wrecks that ruined his voice and his good looks. In 1978, Vincent played a surfer in Big Wednesday, which prophetically foreshadowed his real-life troubles with booze and self-doubt, never being able to reach his full potential. Big Wednesday, which starred Gary Busey and William Catt, is a fantastic movie and will be reviewed in the not-too-distant future. Dub Taylor played the role of McCartney, Mr. McCartney. He was an American actor that had almost 250 movie and television credits. Some of his films were Bonnie and Clyde, 1967, Evel Knievel, 1971, The Wild Bunch, 1969, and Soggy Bottom, USA, where he played Cottonmouth Grouch. Antonio Aguilar was cast as General Rojas of the Juaristas. IMDb says he is, quote, one of the most iconic actor-singers of the Mexican cinema, unquote. The overwhelming majority of his films were made in Mexico during their movie golden age in the 1950s. Marian McCargo was Anne Langdon, the widowed sister-in-law of Colonel Langdon. She is best known as a former tennis champion and attended the same finishing school as Jackie O. She was considered to be a classy actress, and she comes through as very stiff in this part. Lee Meriwether played the wife of Colonel Langdon, Margaret. Lee was Miss America 1955. It is commonly believed that she played the role of Catwoman in the Batman TV series. However, she only had this role in Batman the Movie, 1966. Melissa Newman starred as Charlotte, the daughter of Colonel Langdon and the love interest of Bubba Wilkes and Blue Boy. She never did much after this movie, and thank God. She spent so much time trying to look cute and enunciating every syllable of her fake Southern accent that I would say she is the worst part of this movie. Of course, the regular John Wayne cortege was in tow. Naturally, there was the Duke's drinking buddy, Bruce Cabot. Cabot played the role of the Confederate First Sergeant Jeff Newsby. His main function was passing out booze to the officers. Ben Johnson was cast in the role of Short Grub. You never really see his rank, but I assume in addition to providing frontier gibberish, he was the Union First Sergeant. Ed Faulkner was cast as Confederate Captain Anderson. Faulkner was in many Wayne classics such as The Green Beret, Hellfighters, and McClintock. John Agar was one of the Union soldiers with the name of Christian. During World War II, Agar was an Army Air Force physical fitness instructor. In 1945, he married the actress Shirley Temple. His first movie role was in Fort Apache, 1948, with John Wayne and Henry Fonda. He was in other war and Western movies as well. Paul Fix was cast in a small role as Union General Joe Masters, who levied Colonel Thomas and his men out of the Army. Fix served in the Navy during World War I. Fix, a personal friend of John Wayne, showed up in enough movies to be considered part of the gang. However, he may be best known as the Marshal from the Rifleman TV series. It is believed that he taught Wayne the rolling walk, or as some may call it, a fancy lady's walk. However, at least one interview stated that it was legendary Western lawman Wyatt Earp that taught him to be a cowboy. Fix was the father-in-law of famous Western actor Harry Carey Jr. Fix is also known by many for his role as Dr. Mark Piper in the 1966 second pilot for Star Trek, but I personally am partial to his role as Sheriff Cody in The Night of the Lepus, 1972. Harry Carey Jr. played another of the Union soldiers named Webster. Carey was the son of two actors. His father was one of the early Western stars and worked with director John Ford. Carey Jr. joined the Navy when World War II broke out. He served 3 years as a medical corpsman before his father used his influence to have him transferred to John Ford's Navy Photographic Unit, which also worked for the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the predecessor of the CIA. After the war, Carey Jr. started acting. He worked with directors Raoul Walsh and Howard Hawk. Jr. began working with Wayne in Red River, 1948. In total, he was in 9 movies with Wayne, including She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, 49, Rio Grande, 50, The Searchers, 1956, Islands in the Sky, 1953, Rio Bravo, 1959, The Undefeated, 1969, Big Jake, 1971, and Cahill, U.S. Marshal, 1973. In total, Harry Carey Jr. appeared in nearly 100 movies and almost 100 television programs. He was cast with his father in Red River, 1948, and with his mother, Olive Carey, in The Searchers, 1956, Two Rode Together, 1961, and Billy the Kid vs. Dracula, 1966. Perhaps the oddest actor in this movie was Big John Hamilton, who played Mudlow. Hamilton was in 4 films with Wayne: The Alamo, 1960, McLintock, 1963, Hellfighters, 1968, and The Undefeated, 1969. Hamilton was active in San Antonio politics in the 50s, where he met Wayne. They became friends, and the Duke cast him in these roles. Hamilton opened his steak houses, and Wayne often visited the restaurants when he was in town. Royal Dano had a small part playing the one-armed Confederate Major Sanders at the beginning of the film. In addition to having a 40-year career, he has a well-known and expressive voice. And there's that name. One role I remember him from is the drinking pastor in The Right Stuff, 1983. He also recorded the voice of the audio animatronic Abraham Lincoln in the Hall of Presidents at Disney. Story. This movie begins with ragtag Confederates waiting for a Union attack. The artillery blows the hell out of the Rebs as the Union cavalry charges down and cuts them to pieces. As soon as the remaining Confederates fall back, Colonel John Henry Thomas, John Wayne, learns that Lee had surrendered 3 days prior to the recent killing. They mistakenly state that this is the end of the war, but the overall surrender did not come for several weeks more. Thomas and his adopted Cherokee son, Blue Boy, Roman Gabriel, rig up a white flag. The Confederate commander, Royal Dano, gives an impassioned speech saying that the Rebs are only fighting because the Yanks are on their land, not slavery or anything like that. As the opening credits roll, Colonel Thomas and his men ride through scenes of freed slaves heading north and defeated Confederates heading south. When the credits finish, Confederate Colonel James Langdon, Rock Hudson, rides across his undamaged plantation. A large number of Confederate men and women are loading wagons. He yells for them to get out of their uniforms and take down the battle flag. This is one thing they got right, as the stars and bars most often seen in movies is in fact only the battle flag and not the flag of the Confederate nation. He then explains to them and us that they will be traveling as civilians until they meet the representatives of Maximilian, the French invaders of Mexico. We then go back to the plantation where Colonel Langdon's sister-in-law, Anne Langdon, played by Marian McCargo, is looking at the grave of her Civil War dead husband, the colonel's brother, in case you're not following. That's when the carpetbaggers show. Carpetbaggers were northerners that came south with all of their belongings in a cheap carpetbag to buy land and property at a discount, since most southerners did not have cash to pay taxes and such. Remember Scarlett trying to get money from Rhett to pay her taxes? You know, the Curtins, Carol Burnett, and all that. Carpetbaggers are generally thought in Southern culture to be the lowest form of trash. Another way to look at them would be good capitalists that buy low and sell high, like Colonel Thomas is planning to do with the horses. But that's later. So they show up, one white, Henry Beckman, and one black, James McEachin, which would be sure to inflame the recently whooped Rebs. The carpetbaggers say they came from Natchez, so it can be assumed that they are in Mississippi or central Louisiana, and that the plantation had a 2.5-mile riverfront, so that must be the Mississippi River. When Colonel Langdon calls them trash, the white carpetbagger tells his partner not to get uppity. Dog whistle much? Anyway, the colonel runs them off the property in a most unceremonial way. In what must be a tribute to Showboat 1951, or Band of Angels 1957, all the slaves are standing in the yard with their heads hung down in silent sadness. I found myself wondering why they were still on the plantation with the war over. Colonel Langdon gave the oldest slave, Horace, his grandfather's watch because he would want him to have it. Pre-spoiler alert, Langdon is going to burn the house, leave the land to taxes. Why not give it to Horace and company? They could hardly do worse than he did. The colonel goes to the barn where 2 characters are introduced. The blacksmith, Little George, played by Merlin Olsen, and he is huge because in real life he also played for the LA Rams. The other is Mudlow, Big John Hamilton. Everyone on the Confederate side refuses to talk to him. We find out later it's because he didn't fight in the war because he didn't want to get shot. What kind of person would avoid a war for his own personal benefit? The scene changes to a bunch of Confederates loading wagons and getting ready for a trip. Lieutenant Bubba Wilkes, Jan Michael Vincent, is macking on the Confederate Colonel Langdon's daughter. The colonel puts him back to work. That night the Confederates head out, but not before they burn all of the buildings on the plantation. So, having won the war single-handedly, Union Colonel Thomas and his cavalry muster out of the army with the help of General Joe Masters, played by Paul Fix. They head back to Oklahoma and the West with a money-making scheme catching wild horses for the army. When they leave, we are introduced to Short Grub, played by Ben Johnson, to supply us with authentic frontier gibberish. Colonel Thomas and his ex-Union bunch make it to the Arizona-New Mexico area, where they meet up with Blue Boy and some of the Cherokees from the Oklahoma Territory. While they are waiting, one of the now cowboys is writing a letter. When another cowpoke asks him where he plans to mail it, he says the Pony Express. Actually, the Pony Express only lasted about 18 months and was gone by October 1861, before the Civil War was even going good. I do like their recruiting posters that state, quote, "Wanted, young, skinny, wiry fellas, not over 18, must be experienced riders, willing to risk death daily, orphans preferred," unquote. Anyway, the Indians have the cook, Mr. McCarthy, Dub Taylor, traveling with them. Colonel Thomas comments on McCarthy's cat, to which McCarthy replies, "Hybrid's finest partner I ever had, cleans his paws and buries his leavings, a lot more than some folks I know." The cowboys and Indians head out west, capture around 3,000 wild horses without much incident. They start the herd east to the markets. It is very impressive to see that many horses on the screen. Today it would be CGI. Thomas and Short Grub head to Pedro Flats stage stop to meet with the Army purchasing agents. When he gets there, he meets two Mexicans, maybe French as they speak both languages, who work for Maximilian and offer him a large sum to deliver the horses to Mexico. I like the fact that the stage manager refers to the men as Popping Jays, which I have only heard used by Scotty on the original Star Trek. When the U.S. buyers show up, they say they will only buy 500 horses and at $10 less than the Mexicans offer. Short Grub goes after the Mexicans to accept their offer. The purchasing agent asks, quote, "You selling horses to Maximilian in preference to your own country's army?" unquote. To which Langdon replies, quote, "No, I'm selling horses for $35 in preference to $25, unquote. Is it just me, or is that what the carpetbaggers were doing as well? When Thomas states that the agents are thieves, one of them attempts to draw on him. Thomas backhands him to the ground. When Thomas grabs the other agent, the agent says, "Wait a minute, I didn't do anything." Thomas says, "You should have," and knocks him to the ground. This is a classic John Wayne moment. The Confederates and the Cowboys make it across the Rio Grande, hotly pursued by the U.S. Army. While Blue Boy is out scouting for the herd, he finds the trail of the wagons and sees other tracks of bandits that are shadowing them. Thomas and Blue Boy travel to the wagon train of the Confederates, and after the initial shock, warn them of the bandits. Blue Boy gets all Twitter-pated for Colonel Langdon's daughter. Colonel Thomas gets a little crushed by Ann Langdon. They all get a little pissy about the battles they had shared, but then they drink some bourbon and work everything out. Thomas sends Blue Boy away and stays to face the bandits with the Confederates. The next day the bandits show up and the Confederates arm their women on Thomas's advice. Thomas gives advice to Ann. "Windage and elevation, Mrs. Langdon. Windage and elevation." This is the most well-known line from this movie. Well, in short, they beat the bandits back with help from the cowboys and Indians that Blue Boy brings, so the Confederates owe the Yanks one. Later, the Confederates invite the cowboys and Indians to their camp for a 4th of July picnic. This causes me a little bit of distress. The Confederates were defeated at Gettysburg on July 4th, 1863, so it wasn't a big day for the South. Also, Vicksburg, Mississippi fell on that same date. So the holiday wasn't too big in Mississippi until around the bicentennial. Thomas explains that he is divorced from his wife, but she is happy living in Philadelphia with her cat and teaching piano lessons. Later at the party, they get into a big Donnybrook until the ladies break it up with shotguns. When Lieutenant Wilkes finds out that Blue Boy likes the colonel's daughter, they give him a beating and send him away on a horse. While he is in the desert, he sees the Juaristas, the legitimate Mexican government soldiers. Blue Boy makes it to town under cover. The Confederates make it to Durango, where they are given a welcome dinner by Maximilian's soldiers. But damn, wait, it's Juaristas too. The cowboys and Indians arrive at Durango with the horses and have to wait for the French cavalry to arrive with the money. The Juaristas tell Colonel Langdon that he must ask Thomas for the 3,000 horses. To prove their determination, they decide to shoot Mudlow, the coward that no one likes. He covers his eyes and cries, but Langdon says he will ask for the horses. He has a deadline of noon or everybody will be shot. All the Confederates are imprisoned in the courtyard when the colonel's daughter decides to go for a late-night walk where the Mexican guards are laughing and drinking. Of course they grab her, but Mudlow sprints to her rescue and fights them off until he is knocked out. Blue Boy shows up and kills the 3 guards and takes the girl with him. Langdon tells the tale, and Thomas and his men decide that they have to help by giving away the horses. The 2 Mexican/French popinjays head out to get the French cavalry. When the cavalry arrives, they decide to stampede the horses through them and use gun wagons. They blow through the French quite easily. In a very sad part of the movie, McCartney's wagon wrecks, and before he dies, he asks that his cat be taken care of. The camera then slowly pans to the dead cat. Back in Durango as noon nears, they plan to shoot Mudlow and some others. Little George takes Mudlow's place because they respect him now for defending the girl. The horses arrive just in time to stop the killing. General Rojas, Antonio Aguilar, and the 2 colonels have a toast and add it all up to war. The colonel's daughter makes Blue Boy cut his hair, and Colonel Langdon decides he is going to run for the House of Representatives. It seems like Ann Langdon is set to head out to Oklahoma with Colonel Thomas. They all ride north to the sounds of Yankee Doodle Dandy. World-famous short summary? Former Yankees and former Confederates would rather give horses to Mexicans than let the French get them. Thanks for listening today. Remember, you can drop by iTunes to subscribe, or drop by snarkymoviereviews.com if you want to see my site. And remember, keep those iTunes reviews coming in.